The continued story of Terran, the assistant pigkeeper. I'm glad you stayed to listen. Now sit round, as Papa Bear reads a story. Chapter 13. The Plan. The door slammed shut behind them, and once again the companions found themselves outside the cottage. "Well, I like that!" Ellen cried indignantly. "After all their talk of dear little Dolben and sweet little Dolben, they've turned us out." "Better turned out than into, if you take my meaning," said the bard. "A flam is always kind to animals, but somehow I can't bring myself to feel like I should become one." "No, oh no!" Gurgi cried fervently. "Gurgi too wants to stay as he is, bold and clever." Terran turned back to the cottage and began pounding on the door. "They must listen to us," he declared. "They didn't even take the time to think it over." But the door did not open, and though he ran to the window and rapped long and hard, the enchantresses did not show themselves again. "I'm afraid that's your answer," said Fluter. "They've said all they intend to say, and perhaps it's for the best, and I have the uneasy feeling all that knocking and thumping might, well, you don't know what those, ladies get upset at noises." "We can't just go away," Tarn replied. "The cauldron is in their hands, and, friends of Dolben or not, there's no telling what they'll do with it. I fear them and I distrust them. You heard the way the one called Orgok was talking. Yes, I can well imagine what she'd have done to Dolben." He shook his head gravely. "This is what Gwydion warned against. Whoever has the cauldron can be a mortal threat to Prydain itself, if they choose to be." "Well, at least Ellidyr hasn't found it," Elenwy said. "That's something to be grateful for." "If you want the advice of one who is, after all, the oldest of us here," said the bard, "I think we should do well to hurry home and let Dolben and Gwydion attend to the matter. After all, Dolben should know how to deal with these three." "No," Terran answered, "that I will not do. We should lose precious days in travel. The huntsman failed to get the cauldron back, but who knows what Aron will attempt next. No, we dare not leave the thing here." "For once," declared Elenwy, "I agree. We've come this far, and we shall have to go on to the end. I don't trust those enchantresses either. They wouldn't sleep if they thought we had the cauldron. I shall certainly have nightmares if I think of them with it. Not to mention Aron. I believe no one, human or otherwise, should have that much power." She shuddered. "Ugh, there go the ants on my back again." "Yes, well, it's true," Fluter began. "But the fact remains, they have that wretched pot, and we don't. They're there, and we're here, and it looks very much as though it will stay that way." Terran was thoughtful for a moment. "When Aron wouldn't give the cauldron back to them," he said, "they went and took it. Now since they won't let us have the cauldron, I see only one way. We shall have to take it." "Steal it?" cried the bard. His worried expression changed rapidly, and his eyes brightened. "I mean," he dropped his voice to a whisper, "steal it? Now there's a thought," he went on eagerly. "Never occurred to me. Yes, yes, that's the way," he added with excitement. "Now that has some style and flair to it." "One difficulty," Elenwy said. "We don't know where they've hidden the cauldron, and they evidently aren't going to let us find it." Terran frowned. "I wish Dolly were here. We'd have no trouble at all. I don't know, there must be some way. They told us we could stay the night," he continued. "That gives us from now until dawn. Come, let us not stand in front of their cottage, or they'll know we're up to something. Ordu spoke of a shed." The companions led their horses to the side of the hill where a low, dilapidated building tottered shakily on the turf. It was bare and bleak, and the autumn wind whistled through the chinks in the earthen wall. The bard stamped his feet and beat his arms. "Chilly spot to plan anything," he remarked. "Those enchantresses may have a lovely view of the marshes, but it's a cold one." "I wish we had some straw," Elenwy said, "or anything to keep us warm. We'll freeze before we have a chance to think of anything at all." "Gurgi will find straw," Gurgi suggested. He scurried out of the shed and ran toward the chicken roost. Terran paced back and forth. "We'll have to get into the cottage as soon as they're asleep." He shook his head and fingered the brooch at his throat. "But how? A dawn's clasp has given me no idea. The dreams I had of the cauldron are without meaning to me. If I could only understand them." "Suppose you dozed off right now," said Fluter helpfully, "and slept as fast as you could. As hard as you could, I mean. You might find the answer." "I'm not sure," replied Terran. "I don't think it quite works that way." "It should be a lot easier than boring a hole through the hill," said the bard, "which was my next suggestion." "We could block up their chimney and smoke them out," Elenwy said. "Then one of us could sneak into the cottage. No," she added on second thought, "I'm afraid anything we might put down their chimney, well, they could very likely put something much worse up. Besides, they don't have a chimney, so we shall have to forget that idea." Gurgi meantime had returned with a huge armload of straw from the chicken roost, and the companions gratefully began heaping it on the clay floor. While Gurgi went off again to fetch another load, Terran looked dubiously at the straggly pile. "I suppose I could try to dream," he said, without much hope. "I certainly haven't had a better suggestion." "We can bed you down very nicely," said Fluter, "and while you're dreaming the rest of us will be thinking too. That way we can all be working after our own fashion. I don't mind telling you," he added, "I wish I had a Dawn's brooch. Sleep? I wouldn't need to be asked twice, for I'm weary to my bones." Terran, still unsure, made ready to settle himself in the straw, when Gurgi reappeared, wide-eyed and trembling. The creature was so upset he could only gasp and gesture. Terran sprang to his feet. "What is it?" he cried. Gurgi beckoned them toward the chicken roost, and the companions hurried after him. The agitated Gurgi led them into the wattle and daub building, then slunk back, terrified. He pointed to the far corner. There, in the midst of the straw, stood a cauldron. It was squat and black, and half as tall as a man. Its ugly mouth gaped wide enough to hold a human body. The rim of the cauldron was crooked and battered, its sides dented and scarred. On its lips and on the curve of its belly lay dark brown flecks and stains, which Terran knew were not rust. A long, thick handle was braced by a heavy bar. Two heavy rings, like the links of a great chain, were set on either side. Though of iron, the cauldron seemed alive, grim, and brooding with ancient evil. The empty mouth caught the chill breeze, and a hushed muttering rose from the cauldron's depths, like the lost voices of the tormented dead. "It is the Black Crocan," Terran whispered, in fear and awe. He well understood Gurgi's terror, for the very sight of the cauldron was enough to make him feel an icy hand clutching his heart. He turned away, hardly daring to look at it any longer. Fluter's face was pale. Elodie put a hand to her mouth. In her corner, Gurgi shivered pitifully. Though he himself had found it, he gave no joyous yelps of triumph. Instead, he sank deeper into the straw, and tried to make himself as small as possible. "Yes, well, I suppose it is indeed," replied Fluter, swallowing hard. "On the other hand," he added hopefully, "perhaps it is not. They did say they had a number of other cauldron kettles lying about. I mean, we shouldn't want to make a mistake." "It is the Crocan," Darren said. "I have dreamed of it, and even if I had not, I would know it still, for I can sense the evil in it." "I too," murmured Elodie. "It is full of death and suffering. I understand why Gwydion wants to destroy it." She turned to Terran. "You were right in seeking it without delay," Elodie said with a shudder. "I'll take back all the things I said. The Crocan must be destroyed as soon as possible." "Yes," Fluter said. "I'm afraid this is the Crocan itself. Why couldn't it have been a nice little kettle instead of this ugly hulking brute? However," he went on, taking a deep breath, "let's snatch it. A flam never hesitates." "No!" cried Terran, putting out a hand to restrain the bard. "We dare not take it in broad daylight, and we mustn't stay here, or they'll know we'll have found it. We'll come back after nightfall with the horses and drag it away. For now, we'd better keep to the shed and act as if nothing has happened." The companions quickly returned to the shed. Once away from the Crocan, Gurgi regained some of his spirits. "Crafty Gurgi found it!" he cried. "Oh, yes. He always finds what is lost. He has found piggies, the great cauldron of wicked doings and brewings. Kind master will honor humble Gurgi?" Nevertheless, his face wrinkled with fear. Terran gave Gurgi a comforting pat on the shoulder. "Yes, old friend," he said, "you have helped us more than once, and I never would have imagined they'd have hidden the cauldron in an empty chicken roost under a pile of dirty straw." He shook his head. "I'd think they'd want to guard it better." "Not at all," said the bard. "They were very clever. They put it in one of the first places anybody would look, knowing quite well it was so easy nobody would ever think of looking there." "Perhaps," Terence said. He frowned. "Or perhaps," he added, unable to stifle the dread suddenly filling him, "they meant us to find it." In the shed, the companions tried to sleep, knowing the night to come would be one of hard and dangerous labor. Fluter and Gurgi dozed briefly. Elodie huddled in her cloak, with some straw piled around her. Terran was too restless and uneasy even to close his eyes. He sat silently, in his hands a long coil of rope he had taken from what little gear remained to the companions. They had decided to sling the cauldron between two horses and make their way from the marshes into the safe shelter of the forest, where they would destroy the Crocan. No sign of life came from the cottage. At nightfall, however, a candle suddenly glowed in the window. Terran rose quietly and moved stealthily out of the shed. Clinging to the shadows, he made his way to the low building and peered in. For a moment he stood there, amazed, unable to move. Then he turned and raced back to the others as quickly as he could. "I saw them in there," he whispered, rousing the bard and Gurgi. "They aren't the same ones at all." "What?" cried Elenwy. "Are you sure you didn't stumble on a different cottage?" "Of course I didn't," retorted Taryn. "And if you don't believe me, go and look for yourself. They aren't the same. There are 3 of them, yes, but they're different. One of them was carding wool, one of them was spinning, and the third was weaving." "I suppose really," said the bard, "it passes time for them. There's little enough to do in the middle of these dismal bogs." "I shall indeed have to see this for myself," Elenwy declared. "There's nothing so strange about weaving, but beyond that I can't make any sense of what you say." With Taryn leading, the companions stole cautiously to the window. It was as he had said. Inside the cottage 3 figures went about their tasks, but not one of them resembled Ordu, Orwin, or Orgok. "They're beautiful," whispered Elenwy. "I've heard of hags trying to disguise themselves as beautiful maidens," murmured the bard, "but I've never heard of beautiful maidens wanting to disguise themselves as hags. It isn't natural, and I don't mind telling you it makes me edgy. I think we'd better seize the cauldron and be gone." "I don't know who they are," said Taryn, "but I fear they are more powerful than we could ever guess. Somehow we've fallen on something. I don't know what. It troubles me. Yes, we must take the cauldron as soon as we can, but we shall wait until they're asleep." "If they sleep," said the bard. "Now that I've seen this, nothing would surprise me, not even if they hung by their toes all night like bats." For a long time, Taryn feared the bard was right, and that the enchantresses might not sleep at all. The companions took turns watching the cottage, and it was not until almost dawn that the candle finally winked out. In an agony of waiting, Taryn still delayed. Soon a loud snoring rose from within. "They must have gone back to themselves again," remarked the bard. "I can't imagine beautiful ladies snoring like that." "No, it's Orgok. I'd recognize that snort anywhere." In the still shadows of the false dawn, the companions hastened to the chicken roost, where Elenwy ventured to light her bauble. The crocan squatted in its corner, black and baleful. "Hurry now," Taryn ordered, taking hold of the handle. "Fluter and Elenwy, pick up those rings, and Gurgi lift the other side. We'll haul it out and rope it to the horses. Ready? All lift together." The companions gave a mighty heave, then nearly fell to the ground. The cauldron had not moved. "It's heavier than I thought," said Tarrant. "Try again." He made to shift his grip on the handle, but his hands would not come free. In a spurt of fear he tried to pull away. It was in vain. "I say," muttered the bard, "I seem to be caught on something." "So am I," Elenwy cried, struggling to tear her hands loose. "And Gurgi is caught," howled the tearful Gurgi. "Oh, sorrow! He cannot move!" Desperately the companions flung themselves back and forth, fighting against the mute, iron enemy. Taryn wrenched and tugged until he sobbed for lack of strength. Elenwy had dropped in exhaustion, her hands still on the heavy ring. Once again Taryn strained to break free. The black crocan held the vast. A figure in a long night robe appeared at the doorway. "It's Ordu! We'll be toads for sure!" cried the bard. Chapter 14. The Price. Ordu, blinking sleepily and looking more disheveled than ever, stepped inside the chicken roost. Behind her followed the other 2 enchantresses, also in flapping night robes, their hair unbound and falling about their shoulders in a mass of snarls and tangles. They had again taken the shapes of crones, in no way resembling the maidens Taryn had spied through the window. Ordu raised a sputtering candle above her head and peered at the companions. "Oh, the poor lambs!" she cried. "What have they gone and done? We tried to warn them about the nasty crocan, but the headstrong little goslings wouldn't listen. My, oh my!" She clucked sorrowfully. "Now they've got the little fingers caught." "Don't you think," said Orgok in a croaking whisper, "we should start the fire?" Ordu turned to her. "Do be silent, Orgok," she cried. "What a dreadful thought! It's much too early for breakfast." "Never too early," muttered Orgok. "Look at them," Ordu went on fondly. "They're so charming when they're frightened, like birdlings without their feathers." "You have tricked us, Ordu!" Taryn cried. "You knew we'd find the cauldron, and you knew what would happen." "Why, of course we did, my chicken," Ordu replied sleepily. "We were only curious to find out what you'd do when we found it. And now that you've found it, and now we know." Taryn struggled desperately to free himself. Despite his terror, he flung back his head and glared defiantly at Ordu. "Kill us if you choose, you evil hags!" he cried. "Yes, we would have stolen the cauldron and destroyed it, and so shall I try again as long as I live." Taryn threw himself furiously against the immovable crocan, and once again, with all his strength, tried vainly to wrest it from the ground. "I love to see them angry, don't you?" Orwin whispered happily to Orgok. "Do take care," Ordu advised Taryn, "or you'll harm yourself with all that thrashing about.
We forgive you for calling us hags, she added indulgently. You're upset, poor chicken, and liable to say anything.
You are evil creatures, Terran cried. Do with us what you will, but sooner or later you shall be overcome. Gwydion shall learn of our fate, and Dulbin. Yes, yes, shouted Gurgi. They will find you. Oh yes, with great fightings and smitings.
My dear pullets, replied Ordu, you still don't understand, do you? Evil? Why, bless your thumping little hearts, we aren't evil.
I should hardly call this good, muttered the bard. Not at least from my personal point of view.
Well, of course not, agreed Ordu. We're neither good nor evil. We're simply interested in things as they are, and things as they are at the moment seem to be that you're caught by the crocan.
And you don't care, cried Elmy. That's worse than being evil.
Certainly we care, my dear,
Ordu said soothingly.
It's that we don't care in quite the same way you do, or rather, care isn't really a feeling we have. Come now, said Ordu. Don't trouble your thoughts with such matters. We've been talking and talking, and we have some pleasant news for you. Bring the crocan outdoors. It's so stuffy and eggy in here, and we shall tell you. Go ahead, she added. You can lift it now.
Terran cast Ordu a distrustful glance, but ventured to put his weight against the krogan. It moved, and he discovered, too, his hands were free. With much labor, the companions managed to raise the heavy crocan and carry it from the chicken roost. Outside, the sun had already risen. As the companions set the cauldron on the ground and quickly drew away, the rays of dawn turned the black iron as red as blood.
Yes, now, as I was saying,
Ordu continued, while Terran and his companions rubbed their aching arms and hands.
we've talked it over, and we agree, even Orgok agrees, that you shall have the crocan if you truly want it.
You'll let us take it? cried Terran. After all you've done?
Quite so, replied Ordu. The crocan is useless, except for making cauldron-born. Auron has spoiled it for anything else, as you might imagine. It's sad it should be so, but that's the way things are. Now, I assure you, cauldron-born are the last creatures in the world we should want around here. We decided the crocan is nothing but a bother to us, and since you're friends of Dulbin...
You're giving us the crocan, Terran began in astonishment. Delighted to oblige you, ladies, said the bard.
Gently, gently, my ducklings, Ordu interrupted. Give the crocan. Oh, goodness, no, we never give anything. Only what is worth earning is what is worth having. But we shall allow you the opportunity to buy it.
We have no treasures to bargain with, Terran said in dismay. Alas, that we do not.
We couldn't expect you to pay as much as Auron did, replied Ordu, but we're sure you can find something to offer in exchange. Oh, shall we say, the north wind in a bag?
The north wind, Terran exclaimed. Impossible! How could you ever dream?
Very well, said Ordu. We shan't be difficult. The south wind, then. It's much gentler.
You make sport with us, Terran cried angrily. The price you ask is beyond what any of us could ever pay. Ordu hesitated.
Possibly you're right, she admitted. Well then, something a little more personal. I have it, she said, beaming at Terran. Give us the nicest summer day you can remember. You can't say that's hard, since it belongs to you. Yes, Orwin said eagerly. A lovely summer afternoon, full of sunlight and sleepy scents. There's nothing so sweet, murmured Orgok, sucking a tooth, as a tender young lamb's summer afternoon.
But how can I give that? Protested Terran. Or any other day, when they're inside of me somewhere. You can't get them out. I mean,
we could try,
Orgok muttered. Ordu sighed patiently.
Very well, my goslings. We've made our suggestions and we're willing to listen to yours. But mind you, if it's to be a fair exchange, it must be something you prize as much as the crocan.
I prize my sword, Terran said. It is a gift from Dulbin, and the first blade that is truly mine. For the crocan, I would gladly part with it. He began quickly to unbuckle his sword, but Ordu waved an uninterested hand.
A sword, she answered, shaking her head. Goodness no, my duck. We already have so many, too many in fact, and some of them famous weapons of mighty warriors.
Then, said Terran with hesitation, I offer you Luger. She is a noble animal. He paused, seeing Ordu's frown. Or, he added reluctantly in a low voice, there is my horse, Melonlas, a colt of Melangar, Prince Gwydion's own steed. None is faster or more sure-footed. I treasure Melonlas above all others.
Horses,
said Ordu.
No, that won't do at all. Such a bother feeding them and caring for them. Besides, with Orgok, it's difficult to keep pets about.
Terran was silent for a moment. His face paled as he thought of Adon's brooch. His hand went protectively to it. All that remains to me, he began slowly. No, no! Gurgi cried, thrusting his way toward the enchantresses and brandishing his wallet. Take Gurgi's own treasure! Take bag of crunchings and munchings!
Not food, said Ordu. That won't do either. The only one of us who has the slightest interest in food is Orgok, and I'm sure your wallet holds nothing to tempt her.
Gurgi looked at Ordu in dismay.
But it is all poor Gurgi has to give.
He held out his wallet once again. The enchantress smiled and shook her head. Gurgi's hands fell to his sides, his shoulders drooping, and he turned mournfully away. You must like jewelry, Elodie put in quickly. She pulled the ring from her finger and offered it to Ordu. This is a lovely thing, Elodie said. Prince Gwydion gave it to me. Do you see the stone? It is carved by the fair folk. Ordu took the ring, held it close to her eye, and squinted.
Lovely, lovely, she said. So pretty, almost as pretty as you, my lamb, but so much older. No, I'm afraid not. We have a number of them too. We really don't want any more. Keep it, my chick. One day you might find some use for it, but we surely shall not.
She gave the ring back to Elodie, who sadly replaced it on her finger. I do have something else I treasure, Elodie went on. She reached into the folds of her cloak and brought out the golden sphere. Here, she said, turning it in her hands so that it shone with a bright glow. It's so much better than just a light, Elodie said. You see things differently in it, clear somehow. It's very useful.
How sweet of you to offer it to us, said Ordu. But there again, it's something we don't really need.
Ladies, ladies, cried Fluter, you've overlooked a most excellent bargain. He stepped forward and unslung his harp. I quite understand that bags of food and all such can't possibly interest you, but I ask you to consider this harp. You're alone in this gloomy fen, he went on, and a little music should be just the thing. The harp almost plays of itself, Fluter continued. He put the beautifully carved instrument to his shoulder, barely touching the strings, and a long, lovely melody filled the air. You see, cried the bard, nothing to it.
Oh, that is nice, Orwin murmured wistfully. And think of the songs we could sing to keep ourselves company.
Ordu peered closely at the harp.
I notice a good many of the strings are badly knotted. Has the weather got into them?
Well, not exactly the weather, said the bard. With me they tend to break, frequently, but only when I color the facts a bit. I'm sure you ladies wouldn't have that kind of trouble.
I can understand you should prize it, Ordu said. But if we want music, we can always send for a few birds. No, all things considered, it would be a nuisance, keeping it in tune, and so on. Are you certain you have nothing else?
Ordu asked hopefully. That's all, said the disappointed bard. Absolutely everything, unless you want the cloaks off our backs.
Bless you, no, said Ordu. It wouldn't be proper in the least for you ducklings to go without them. You'd perish in the cold, and what good would the crocan be to you then? I'm sorry, my chicks, Ordu went on. It does indeed seem you have nothing to interest us. Very well, we shall keep the crocan, and you shall be on your way.
This concludes chapter 14. Thank you for listening, and remember, have a good day. You deserve it.